Hey guys, it's Chris from Z1 here to show you a how-to video on replacing the front brakes on your G37. Alright, so first step is you want to make sure the car is lifted, wheels off the ground, and your safety equipment on, so gloves, jack stands and a jack, or if you're lucky and you have a lift, make sure that everything is nice and safe. So first step, we're going to use our 21 and take our wheels off. Okay, so the first step is we're going to remove our caliper cover. This is what holds in our brake pads. There is two 14mm bolts that sits on the back between the brake line. And what we're going to do is the inside of this pin can rotate while we're removing it. So sometimes it won't, sometimes it will, but we just recommend holding on with either a spanner or some sort of apparatus just to hold on to our nut so that it doesn't spin. Okay. So our nut's beginning to spin. You can even hold it by hand. Sometimes you may need some tools. Once that one's loose, just take our bolt out and set this in a safe place. And the same goes for the bottom. Have our 14. Just gonna crack him off. And once it's cracked loose, you can do it by hand most of the time. So the next step is now removing the caliper cover. It's quite simple, just slide it out the way. And it's that easy. Now we don't want to put too much tension on our brake line, so I just recommend sitting the caliper just on the sway bar or using a zip tie to string it up somehow. But really just want to just alleviate any major stress from your front brake lines. Okay, so the next step is now to remove the brake pads. Very easy, they should just slide out of the way and they sort of unclip out of here. That's one. And we just got a second at the back here. And these have a little bit of life left. They look a little bit unevenly worn. This one's more worn than this one. So it's probably a good time for replacement there. They aren't critical, but you know, can never be, better to be safe than sorry. So at this point, if you're just doing the pads, we would replace the new pads on. But in this case, we have new rotors to go on. These are looking a little bit crusty. So we're gonna grab our 22 socket and remove the two brackets that hold on our caliper carrier. And be mindful, these are quite tight. Oh, so sometimes you're gonna need an extension. All right, so this is a quick little trick here. If you don't have a breaker bar or a long enough pole to remove the bolts, because it's quite strong, you can just use the top half of a jack pole, and we've now increased our leverage. Bolt right here. One, and then one more at the top. And once we've broken that loose, we should be able to do the rest by hand. And do not lose this washer here, it's very important. Okay. Oh, alrighty, so just have to be careful as this bolt comes out, this will drop. And we're just gonna leave this in the orientation that we took it out so we don't flip it upside down. Just leave this right here, put our bolt to the side. And now we have access to our brake rotor. So in this case, we're quite lucky as it's corrosion free. So it simply just lifts off and our rotor will come off. There are a few other ways. If the rotor isn't budging, you could bang it with a hammer, or there is a little placement here where you can place a tool to push it out. But we're very lucky, or you can just move ours straight off. Okay, so very importantly, the Z1 rotors are directional. So we have a front left and a front right. very easy way to tell this is just by looking at the part number. We have an FR front right and an FL front left. And the way you know which way this goes is if you were sitting in the vehicle, your left and your right side. So I'm sitting in the car, my right side, my left side. So we're going to replace the left side. Boom. Now a top trick to keep the rotor flat, you can just get a wheel bolt, screw it all the way in, and this will keep it flush against the hub. There we go. Next step, we're going to put our bracket back on. Simply slide it over, locate the holes, grab our bolts, and I always recommend to start these by hand so that you don't cross-thread them. Once one started by hand, you should be able to get to the bottom one. There we go. And we're ready to go. Now we're just going to tighten these by hand. That's the bottom one. These bolts are quite long, so don't be alarmed if it takes a minute to tighten these. But just take your time. It's no rush. And remember, brakes, no mistakes. All right, here at Z1, we do recommend torquing your brakes back to spec with a torque wrench. You can see that torque spec right here. Okay, so while this step is not completely necessary, it's definitely a good habit. I like to place down my used rotor box underneath to catch any mess. And then just with a wire brush, just cleaning out any extra brake dust so it's clean for the next brake pads. And as we can see, it's already cleaning it up pretty good. It doesn't have to be, spotless, but just getting it nice and scuffed up and cleaned, ready for those next brake pads is just always a really, really good habit to have. So before we put our next brake pads in place, we are going to have to push our pistons on the brake caliper back into place. As you can see, they've extended quite far. This is also a good time just to inspect visually, make sure we don't have any splits in our boots here. These don't need rebuilding, they're in good shape. Now, I do strongly recommend using a brake pad spreader, which is a proper tool. There's plenty of tutorials online for that. But if you're doing the ultimate DIY hero, you can use an old brake pad and then some sort of apparatus to push the said brake pad back, whether that's like a G-clamp or some sort of pliers, something to push these back at the same time. The trick is not doing them one by one. You want to push them back evenly at the same time. So we're fortunate to have a pad spreader right here, and I'm just using the brake pad, the old brake pad, to push these pistons back in. Simply squeezing it by hand, nice and slow. So it does not have to be a fast process here. And then we can already see those pistons have retracted quite a good amount. And once they are flat and flush with the rubber, should be good to go. Boom, look at that. Okay, so now it's time to put our brake pads in. I would recommend some sort of brake pad paste on the back. This is for heat transfer, as well as a little bit of quietness of any pad rattling. But what we're going to do is we're going to put our brake pads in. We want to make sure that this tab lines up with this little spring here. And all we have to do is line up the bottom piece with the corresponding slot. So simply just place the pad in, line it up, and our little clip sits in place there, nice and happy. All we have to do for the back is exactly the same. Line it up, make sure we're not using the black portion here. We're going to use the part of the slots, that's the brake pad side. Line it up at the back, and exactly the same, pop these back in. So I just got a little bit of grease here, and all we're going to do is just put a little bit, very, very thin coats, just against the back of the pad here. And all this will do is just stop for any major noise and just give a little bit of protection. And we'll do the same for the back side as well. All right, so now we're ready to place our brake caliper back on. We've pushed these pistons back in and we should slide straight over the top. Now, if you're having any troubles getting this back over, you may need to push the pistons back a little further. But what we can do, we can also push these little pins at the top here, slide them back so they do have a bit of movement, and we're perfectly in place here. All we have to do now is thread our bolts back in, get one started at the top here. Oh, there we go. And we'll get one for the bottom. Okay. And then we're going to torque these to spec. So as we can see, we're now starting to spin this nut. So this is a good time to grab a tool, hold it in place, or if you're lucky enough, you can just use your hands. So once we've torqued everything down, you may see a little bit of movement. That is totally normal and fine. What we'll do now is head into the car, apply the brake pedal, and we should make then solid contact with our piston, and we should eliminate this movement here. We'll put the wheel back on and repeat the same for the other side.
Be sure to follow the manufacturer's recommendations on how to bed your brakes in with the brake pads of your choice.